Welcome to another series, Magnify Our Impact. And this morning I'm super chuffed, very excited about interviewing a great man. And, you know, I know we use so many words out there, as a throwaway line, but this gentleman to me is great at what he's achieved on our planet, not just in the UK he's achieved an enormous amount for so many millions of people around the world and particularly in Africa. He is an epidemiologist. I'm not sure if I've said that correctly, but he's going to correct me, I'm sure. And this gentleman's name is Alan Fenwick. He has an OBE. He's worked to change the lives of many millions, as I said, of children around the world. And it's great to be able to understand a couple of things with regards to helping internationally. The first thing is, how has Alan, what I'm really excited about hearing from him this morning is, how has Alan managed to leverage his resources to create this level of scale in the world? And secondly, of course, through his organization and through his leadership, he's enabled people through raising an enormous amount of money. So those are two major elements that I'm sure he's going to share with us, among others, that will help us to use our resources to do what we can to help the world. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Alan Fenwick. Alan, good morning. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Craig. I'll introduce myself a little bit and try and justify the introduction that you've just gone through. Basically, I'm now a retired scientist, an epidemiologist, and a parasitologist, which means that I've, over the years, drifted, if you like, into the study of human parasites. And my first degree, or my second degree, in fact, was in parasitology and entomology, the subject of insects, at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine a long time ago, at the time of the Beatles, in fact. And I was lucky enough to end up with a master's degree and the opportunity to get a PhD studying in the field in Tanzania, employed by the British government to help the Tanzanian government with research into various parasites. I stayed in Tanzania for 5 years, and then I was headhunted to go to the Sudan, where the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine had recently graduated two very clever Sudanese people with PhDs, and they were going back with grants from the Wellcome Trust to work in the Sudan. And the basic feeling was that it wasn't very easy to work in the Sudan, and they might sort of drift into what was perceived as a sort of lazy life and not do much work. And so I was asked to go out and work with them. And my terms of reference from the Wellcome Trust were to make sure that these two guys were successful. It did take 17 years, and I stayed 17 years in the Sudan. But during that period, one of them became the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine in Khartoum University, and the other one became the Minister of Health. So they were relatively successful, and I think my job was well done. I worked while I was there on research into the control of malaria and more specifically schistosomiasis or bilharzia in a huge irrigation scheme to the south of Khartoum between the two Blue and White Niles. In 1988, I was again coming to the end of my support there and looking what to do. And the American government recruited me to go to Egypt, where a lot of money was being pumped into the country after the Camp David Agreement, in which Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty, which was bought, if you like, by the American government, who had for a long time been supporting Israel with financial support, and they offered an equivalent support to Egypt. But they were a bit reluctant to write a check to the Egyptians And so what they did was they said they would support specific projects. And believe it or not, bilharzia or schistosomiasis was considered to be the most important disease in Egypt at the time. This was partly because Abdul Halim Hafiz, who was the Elvis Presley of Egypt, died of this disease in 1977. And so the whole of the country was very aware of what the disease was. And in fact, the prevalence rate outside of Cairo was about 50%. And so there was quite a job to be done. The American government supported me on a 10-year project to do research. And at the same time, the World Bank supported the Ministry of Health to actually control the disease by providing the drugs that were necessary to treat people. And I was lucky enough to be the person who directed both the research side and the control side in Egypt. When that program came to an end in 2000, 2001, we'd reduced the prevalence of bilharzia in Egypt from about 30% down to less than 2%. And so it was no longer a disease of public health importance, which was quite a significant achievement, and one that we were able to give to Bill Gates and show him just what could be done with a relatively small amount of money. We're talking about 50 US cents per person per year to actually control these diseases. And at that time, there wasn't a single country in sub-Saharan Africa with a program of school health or of bilharzia control, or in fact, intestinal worm control, despite the fact that over 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa were infected. And so I was able, as you said in the introduction, to persuade Bill Gates that although he just started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they were spending a lot of money on childhood vaccines and on research to find a vaccine against malaria and HIV, that considering the number of people who were infected with this disease in Africa, and I'm talking 10 times as many people had bilharzia as had HIV, for example, and the cost of treatment was less than $1 per person per year, that it was a very cost-effective investment for him. And he bought it, and we ticked a few of his boxes. And so the project which I started, called the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, SCI, which was based in Imperial College in London, so that I had good access to any country in Africa within 24 hours, was founded with Bill Gates' money. The project was relatively successful over a period of 5 years. We worked, first of all, with the amount of money that we had in 6 countries. And by 2006, 2007, we were looking to expand the project into, if possible, every country in Africa. And we were able to then persuade the British government and the American government to support our program, and our expansion took place. As I said, I'm now a retired person, and I directed SCI for about 15 years. And by the time I left, we had delivered something like 200 million treatments against intestinal worms and bilharzia in 16 countries in Africa. And that program has expanded even further since I retired. And now every country in Africa has a school health program, which they never had before. They have a bilharzia control program, and they have a program against some other neglected tropical diseases caused by different worms. And I think we can say that the quality of life and the improvement in health has been across Africa, and generations of children, adolescents, and even adults have been saved from a premature death due to these parasitic diseases. So that's a summary of my life and achievements. And I'll leave you to ask individual questions about the details that you'd like to follow up on.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much. I'm sitting here actually listening to this, and as you know, we talked before, and it's astounding, really, what you've achieved, and you know, for me, it's reminded me of what's possible on that scale. That you had a certain mindset, not just to educate yourself, but to take action. So tell me about, what do you think are the 2 or 3 things that are in you, that are personal to you, that have made you so successful in this world? What's driven you? What do you think it is about you?
Well, when I got to Tanzania and I started doing what I was paid to do, which was to try and control these snails using chemicals, I got into all sorts of sidelines. And the more I looked, the more fascinating this disease and its ramifications became. The first thing was that I found that almost everybody in Tanzania, where I was working, was involved with agriculture. And agriculture needed irrigation and water to make the plants grow. And the contact with water meant that everybody was infected. And children, when they came out of school, the first thing they did was take their clothes off and jump into a lake or a pond or a stream because it was 90 degrees or,
yes,
well, very, very hot. And therefore, everybody was passing these eggs out and they were infected. And although they were infected as children and their symptoms were relatively small, by the time they were 30, they were going to die because their liver would be completely blocked by the eggs that the worms had laid, because only 50%, it's a random process of them getting out of the human body. And if they don't break through the capillary tubes into the intestine, they get washed to the liver, which is a bit like a filter. And the liver gets blocked with these eggs, and it can cause very serious consequences and even death. So I'm looking around thinking, well, what chance have these people got to lead a good life? As children, they've got past the childhood diseases, which in those days, and we're talking the 1960s, were quite prevalent, like polio, diphtheria, scarlet fever, malaria, which kill hundreds and hundreds of millions of children, or did in those days, in their first 5 years. But by the time they got to school, these kids ought to be running a marathon. They used to be playing football and doing all sorts of things. What holds them back in that age group, 5 to 12, are these parasites. And we have a drug. Well, let's say there's 5 different parasites, and we have 5 different drugs, and each drug only needs to be given once a year, and the kids are clear. And they will then grow. They will. Intestinal worms live in the stomach of these children. These children haven't got much food. They're very poor. But the worms eat the food before the children can benefit from the nutrition. One pill costing 2 US cents will eliminate those worms for 6 months.
That's amazing.
And then the kids regain their appetite and they grow.
Yes.
I mean, look at the kids in England today. Every child today is a foot taller than his parents. Why? Because they have never suffered from these worms in infancy. Whereas in the post-war years, everybody got worms. And so they were suffering the way the Africans are suffering today. But now with hygiene and with health and safety, nobody gets worms, and they're all got better nutrition levels,
yes,
and they're all growing, and kids are all 6'5" now.
So, Alan, you make it. I mean, it's not easy. You talk about the simplicity of this pill and to eradicate the worms within our system, and to keep us healthy for such a minimal sum. But yet, obviously, there's an enormous amount of research that went into the back of that to be able to create it. But what I'm also interested in is perhaps any decent human being with your level of education and your vision of what you were seeing could be able to create that. But I feel that there's one thing to go and notice this, which took a lot of education to get you to that place. But there's another thing to act on it on scale. And many people say, well, this is very sad. This is going on and that's going on. And then get back on an aeroplane or whatever, and we go home. So I'm interested in what has driven you to, is it your values? Is it your upbringing? What's driven you to say that this is not good enough? Is it just a stoic attitude to we have to make the world healthier? What's been driving all of this all of your career?
Well, first
what are your values
behind it? A fascination with the disease itself.
Okay.
And then a realization, because in the 1970s, a new drug was developed, which was specific for this particular worm disease. Because these worms are living inside the human body, inside the blood vessels around the bladder and the intestine. And in order to kill them, you've got to get a poison to them. And in the early days, they were using antimony drugs. And there was a 50-50 chance that you'd kill the worms, and another 50-50 chance that you'd kill the human being who was harboring the worms. But we got a safe drug.
Yes, but...
And therefore, there was an answer, but there was no realization in the world. There was no realization of the seriousness of the disease. None of these diseases were on the national plans of the ministries of health in Africa in the year 2000. Not a single country in Africa with a 5-year Ministry of Health plan mentioned these diseases.
And so what do you feel helped you step by step? Because, you realized this, there was a realization, you convinced other people to realize what was going on. And I want to get on to how you convinced people to give you that amount of money. But before that, you could have also continued to study and research, and you could have lectured, and you could have stayed lecturing. But you went on the ground and you practiced, which presumably is about a love of people and a love of those communities. But I'm also interested in, I know that you had a real passion for understanding and learning, and the fascination of how you can cure people and this disease. But I'm interested in, you've got some values, and you may not realize them, you may realize them, but you make it sound so easy, but to keep going when you were up against all these barriers, I'm interested in what kept you going at a practical level. If I was to ask your friends, to describe what kept this guy going until he helped over 200 million people, that fascinates me.
Well, it was a lifetime's achievement, and the achievement grew and grew and grew. And in the Sudan, for example, the people, there were 2 million people lived on an irrigation scheme called the Gezira, which was a flat area of land irrigated without any pumps by water from the Nile. And the disease in that area was just unbelievable. Everybody was infected with this disease. Everybody peed and pooed into the canals because they didn't have any toilets. and the transmission of the disease was hugely concentrated. And yet it was so simple. We provided these people with toilets. All they had to do was dig a hole in the ground, and we gave them concrete slabs, and they had a pit latrine. We sprayed their houses once a year to stop the mosquitoes giving them malaria. And as far as bilharzia is concerned, we gave them fresh water with little hand pumps, and we gave them pills once a year to treat them. And the difference in these people, the gratitude of these people, very simplistic, very poor people, was just heartwarming. And, all you wanted to do was reach out to more. And then when we went to Egypt for the first time, there was a political will to get rid of this disease because of the death of this very famous singer just a few years prior to me going there. There was an incredible fear of the disease. The Ministry of Health were concentrating on controlling this disease. And so we were welcome as experts there.
Yes.
To be able to do something. And the achievement that we managed is documented. We documented what we were doing. We trained staff in Egypt. People were crying out for the drugs to be treated. And the graph, rather like what we're getting with the graph of coronavirus here in the UK now, you can see the reduction over time as a result of a very simple measure. So when that had been achieved in Egypt, I was already 60 years old. And the idea was, oh, well, I can retire now. I've done my job. But then I went to a few conferences to report what we'd achieved in Egypt. And every country in Africa had somebody there who said, God, we haven't got any of these drugs. We haven't got Land Rovers. We haven't got motorbikes. We know we've got the disease, but nobody's doing anything about it. And I thought, well, I could do something about it. And I've got people to work with. And so I formulated a plan, which I proposed, as you said in your introduction, to Bill Gates. And I said that cost-effective inputs against these diseases, you will not find a more cost-effective medical intervention. And 25% of the population in Africa need this intervention. And so my drive then was to say, in 2001, okay, I've done it in Egypt. Why the hell don't I do it in every other country in Africa? And that was my ambition. I personally didn't manage to get to every other country in sub-Saharan Africa because there's 40 of them. But today, every country in Africa has a program to treat all the people who are infected or at risk with this disease. And they do it with drugs which are donated by the pharmaceutical industry, using money to deliver from the donating bilateral country aid programs. And it works.
That scalability is impressive, and just having that will. But what would your advice be to somebody who is listening to this, who has a charity, who wants to get in front of somebody like Bill Gates? What's your advice to fundraisers who are sitting there thinking, we've got the most incredible programs, and at the moment we've got £30,000 or £300,000, and we need to get to 50 million. What's your advice for people? You said that you laid out a plan. What's your advice to people, no matter what the project is, to be able to raise serious amounts of money? What would you advise them to do, and how?
Okay, so the plan has to have certain elements. The first one is that it's got to be, and we're talking Africa now, not in England or somewhere like that. It's got to be what the people in Africa know about and want. So, for example, when I first went to Uganda, which was the first country that I decided to implement my work in, but almost every country had somebody who had been trained, because throughout the 60s, different aid organizations in different countries would pick up individuals in Africa and take them back to either Germany or Denmark or England or America and train them. But when they went back to their country, they were the only person who knew about bilharzia. That will continue with that as the example. Nobody above them knew what it was. They didn't know that it was a problem. And so basically the guy sat in his office, taking his salary from the Ministry of Health with a newspaper in one drawer of his desk and his sandwiches in another. He didn't have the wherewithal to implement the knowledge that he'd been given. And what I wanted to do was give those people the wherewithal to be able to go ahead and do the program themselves, not to enforce what they should do, but discuss with them what they could do within a certain amount of resources available. And I didn't go to them until I had the resources. You know, it's a chicken and egg situation. You can't go and see the Minister of Health in Tanzania and say, hey, you've got a population of 40 million, 10 million of those people are infected, at least. You need to treat them. Because he'll say, well, they're the poorest people in my country. I don't have any money because all the ministers of health are short of money. And so I had to be able to say, okay, I'll give you the drug. I can provide you with the resources. I will send one of my staff out to train your people, and we'll start small. But we can start small in a number of different places. So we compartmentalize and then we expand. But you don't do that in 10 countries. You do that in one country. And then when one country is successful, you go and show 4 others. And then it's like a pyramid growth.
So going.
Yeah,
sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I didn't answer your question other than ramble. So I would say, in retrospect, with short, sharp response, if you want to be successful, you've got to plan within your capabilities and your resources, and you've got to be doing something which is wanted by the country in which you're going. You can't just walk in and say, Bill Gates says do this, because they won't do it. They've got to realize themselves that this is what they want. So health education.
And you mentioned earlier about a lot of people having fear about something, about a disease or what have you. And what drove you? Were you emotionally, were you fearful of what was happening to the world? And did you want to change that in people? Because earlier you said that it was really heartwarming to see the gratification of the difference that you were making. What emotions do you think need to drive people to be able to keep going? Because sometimes it's, you mentioned also the carrot and the stick. For me, to, passionate about emotional needs psychology and to inspire people, of course, discomfort can make change. But what do you think inside you emotionally, Alan, helped you to say, this is no good, we're changing this? Is it just who you are, or is there always been a desire to help? What do you think has driven you emotionally? And what do you think needs to drive other people emotionally for us to get rid of more diseases? Because at the moment, we're learning through the coronavirus pandemic is we need to learn to look after people more. We need to learn to love our communities more. And that's a lesson that I got from Africa, is that we need to change the way that we're living. And so I'm interested in, how do you feel? Here's my question. how do you feel we should change our thoughts and our emotions to get rid of more diseases and live a healthier life?
Well, what occurs to me from while you were talking is that there are a number of different types of people in this world. And I'm fortunate. I'm one of those people who was in the right place at the right time, and I recognized a need, and I was enthusiastic to do something about it because I knew that I could, and I was driven. And everybody who you talk to who has donated money to my cause will tell you that they did it because I was enthusiastic, I was knowledgeable, and they felt that I would deliver and use the money that they gave to me in a cost-effective way. Now, it strikes me that I'm one of those sort of people who, I mean, I never dreamt about this disease before I knew what it was. But once I did know what it was, I was excited and enthusiastic. What it brings to mind is people like the Durrells, for instance, who loved animals since they were 3 or 4 years old. Boris Johnson probably falls into this category. He wanted to be prime minister from when he was 6 or something like that. But there are other people who go to work because they've got to go to work. They've got to earn money, so they put food on the table, and at the first possible moment to retire, they'll retire. Whereas people like me, I worked till I was 75, and there are other colleagues of mine who are doing the same thing because we love what we're doing.
Yes. And so you mentioned 3 deep values there that to me are enormously valuable. One is your enthusiasm, one is your knowledge, and one is your ability to deliver. So tell us more about those things, because to me, emotions drive a lot. I'm not saying they drive everything, because we have logic and we have emotion, and we need both. But I think, without the fire in your belly, without the enthusiasm, and without the will to be able to gain that knowledge and to deliver, you don't achieve much. So those 3 things are really valuable, and I think will be very valuable for us to explore more for the listeners of this, is that I understand enthusiasm. I understand your enthusiasm and your passion for eradicating this disease and understanding how it all works, and I understand that. And your deep thirst for knowledge. But talk to me about, you go in front of a donor and they could see your enthusiasm and they could see your knowledge. But talk to me about, how did they know you were going to deliver? Because you've done it before?
Well, I mean,
there's something in you?
Yeah, you build up a reputation. So, for example, in Egypt, I was given $40 million by the American government to encourage something like 20 to 30 different Egyptian researchers to work with the American equivalents to do research in a number of different fields. And at the same time, the World Bank allocated $40 million to Egypt to buy the drug, the new drug, and to deliver it and reduce the prevalence of schistosomiasis. I modestly have to say that I had the organization and vision ability to actually do that.
There's 2 or 3 things that you had that are so important. Number one is you really worked incredibly hard to understand a deep need in lots of people. And I think that's what a lot of people don't take enough time to do. In other words, we think there's a need, but we just want to get some more money in. So we just jump on a project and do something, and it may be doing some good. But what I see from you, and the reason why I think you've had such scalability, is because when you become a real expert, so number one, here's my first massive learning here. I know this, but it's reminded me, is we have to become an absolute expert in what we're doing. We have to really understand what we're doing. The second thing is we have to go deep into really, really understanding people and understanding their needs. And, and that might be obvious because if people are dying, they need to live, but deeper than that, much deeper than that of what you were doing. So understand and research, become an expert, understand the need of the people that you're selling to and that you're helping. And then really create, and I think this is about reading and surrounding yourself with people that have vision. And the third thing that you've reminded us of is to have a real vision for what's possible. Would you agree with that?
No, but I mean, absolutely. Then, and that was a point I was trying to get across, which is that you've got to tailor your program and your request to something that you know you can achieve.
Yes.
Now, a big example is Bill Gates saying, I'm going to eradicate malaria in 5 years. Everybody knew he wasn't going to do it, but he tried. Now, I don't go for that. I go for...
This is what I can do.
I will try to eradicate malaria in 5 years. I will make progress towards it. That's my target, but not to promise it.
Yes.
But what I'll promise is that in the meantime, we will treat X million people and we will improve their quality of life. And children who have been treated every year with the drug that I've managed to get from the pharmaceutical company, they now can go to school and feel healthy.
Yes.
Before that, they couldn't even get out of bed. They wouldn't go to school. They'd laze around looking after the goats and be perfectly content there. Now they've got a thirst for education themselves because they're fit and healthy.
It's enormous. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned a couple of times the coronavirus, and I'm fully aware that you're an expert in eradication of parasites and worms, and your work has been in a different field, in a slightly different field. But just, give us a view. I know you can't give me a detailed summation of what's going to happen or where we're at. But in general terms, please give me your thoughts on how we're living at the moment with the coronavirus pandemic, and what's your view on it?
Well, I think that it's a very difficult decision that the governments have had to make between protecting people who are particularly vulnerable, and obviously the over 70s fall into that category because the number of people who die, who get infected, is much greater if they're over 70 than younger. But at the same time, the younger people are suffering much more than the older people. My lifestyle hasn't particularly changed because I was staying at home most of the time anyway. But the younger people are losing their jobs. They've always lived, the majority of the population lives from hand to mouth. They earn their money. Admittedly, they go out and have a few beers and they earn enough money to enjoy it. But also they pay for rent, they pay mortgage, they pay for food, and they pay for transportation. And without a job, these people are really suffering. And so the politicians have had to balance the value of human life, mostly in the older people, with the economic consequences of stopping everybody working. They've done it for 2 months, and I think the cost of what they've done is beginning to hit home, and we've just got to get back to work. And I hope that people who've enjoyed 80% of their salary and not working will actually want to go back to work.
Yeah, want to go back to work, absolutely. So,
but I think they will. I think, they want to get out of the house, and they... The pride in bringing home your salary and having worked to do so is quite strong. But there is a danger that the older and infirm are going to have their lives shortened, and that also is very sad for them and for their families.
Absolutely.
Very difficult. And I must say, you say, do I fear about the world? I really fear for the attitude of the people who do nothing but criticize
Yeah.
Because whatever the government do, they're going to be upsetting somebody.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. It's a super tough job. Alan, thank you so much. I want to, in my head, I've got, lists of questions, but I want to ask you two quick final questions, because I think these are vitally important for people. Just and one is for people who are starting off in the world of international development, or wanting to work in the charity sector, or leading a young team culturally. What's your advice to a young charity leading a team and creating a culture of people that they really want to do something in the world? If you could just give them two or three, just one-liners or a very quick idea of what's key for them to think about on a daily basis as they go forward. What is it? Is there values or beliefs or things that they do? What are the two or three things that are most important for a young charity?
Well, I think the first thing is they have to find a niche.
Okay.
They have to find something which needs to be done, which perhaps is not recognized as needs to be done by the people, by the recipients, and it has to be something for which there is an answer. Providing fresh water, for example, is one very good example, and providing medicines, which we have now done. The other thing is it's very difficult for them, because when I started out, nobody was doing anything. And so I could have picked one of many different things to do. And I picked the disease. And for a long time, I was virtually the only person who was the champion of that particular disease. And I worked very closely with champions of two or three other diseases, and we formed a team.
Yes.
Today,
there's lots of people
One example is the need for people in the UK to go out to these countries. When I went out to Tanzania, there was one university in Tanzania. I think there's 30 now.
Gosh.
When I went to the Sudan, there were 2 universities. I think there are 30 now. And there are many, many, many more local graduates. So another example is doctors who used to go on electives to Africa. There are now many medical schools in Africa, and there just isn't the room for our medics to go there. There isn't the demand anymore. So, yes, find that. The next thing is and you're talking about a small charity with a few people, is to pick a country, but to aim and be ready to expand, so that you don't just go to one village in northern Tanzania and build a school or what have you. You've got to be thinking this is the start, and there are many other villages which need schools. So you've got to be thinking about doing a really good job with the first one. Then you can use the results of that one to show other people and other donors that this is what you can achieve and what you want to do somewhere else. The next thing is that what you do in any one area where you go has got to be sustainable. You can't go in, do this, and this, and then leave. No. There are many villages in Africa which have got toilets built, and nobody gave any thought to the maintenance of those toilets and the cleaning of those toilets, because the mentality of the people who are there may not fit in with cleaning toilets. And that's just an example. But whatever it is you do, you've got to train and give somebody in the village the responsibility to make sure that what you've instigated will be sustainable. And it will go on for the next generation and the next generation. And for that, you've got to have educated the people that they want what you've provided, and that they will take it on when you leave.
Yeah. No, that's very valuable. Alan, thank you so very much. Thank you for talking to me this morning. There's a huge amount there. I mean, I think there's about 10 different major elements there that I want to decipher and really understand. And for me, it's, what's sticking in my mind most of all. I mean, there's about 10 things, but the 3 or 4 that now that are huge for me. One is to really know that you can deliver, to make things sustainable, to have, like you said earlier, to be enthusiastic, but also have a deep knowledge, become an expert, and really know that you can deliver sustainably. So that to me, and when I look back, when I started my charity, I had 2 of those. I definitely didn't have all 3. So that's really, really valuable. Thank you so much for being here and for giving us your time. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed being with you.
Craig, I'd like to add one thing, if I may.
Please. And
that is that don't think that everybody I approached pulled out their checkbook and gave me money.
No, I understand.
You're very lucky if 1 in 10.
Yes,
you tick
keep going.
Box. You can tick some people's boxes and you don't tick other people's boxes. People, all of them, listen to me and they sound very enthusiastic, but I've had people go away and I've never heard from them again.
Of course.
So you have to be, you have to have the mindset. You have to be thick-skinned.
Yes.
And you've got to be very, very pleased when the 1 in 10 turns around and gives you £100 instead of the 10,000 you asked for.
Yes.
You just got to accept that you're offering something, you're telling them what you'll do, and 20 other people are also offering something completely different, and they're going to make a choice.
Yes.
So don't be disappointed if not everybody turns around and opens their wallet.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a boss, my first ever sales boss. If I was selling something for £20 and I asked 40 people, I had 39 no's. Every no gave me an extra 50p in my pocket. And it was the 40th person that wrote the check. Just keep going, right? Keep on going. Yeah. And, don't take no for an answer. Keep on going. Say thank you for your time. And the next person or the next person or the next person will say yes. That's really solid advice. And, what you've just said there, which I think also is really, really important, is so many people that I've seen fundraise, tell people what their idea is, but when they're not clear on the scale of the impact. And I think it's really important, isn't it, to be clear on what you are going to deliver. And
the bigger the amount that you're asking for, the greater the justification of the cost effectiveness and the impact is.
Right. Yeah, that's
it's got
powerful.
To be.
Yes. Huh.
Because you can get just an ordinary passerby in the street to give you 50p.
Yes.
He says, okay, it's for charity.
Yeah, sure.
He has no idea where it's going to go. But if he's going to write a cheque for £5,000, he wants to know what's going to happen to that £5,000.
Or 50 million. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Alan. Great talking to you.